He bought an old bridge for $100. $100 for some rotting wood and rusty nails spanning a river that didn't matter, leading to a patch of land nobody wanted. But the woman selling it, Clara Hardin, she looked like she was selling the last piece of her soul. Her hand trembled as she held the deed, the paper rattling softly in the damp morning air. The mist was thick, clinging to the water below, but something about the way she kept glancing at the bridge's massive center post was wrong. She'd owned this bridge for 6 months, ever since her husband died, but she looked at it like a stranger, like a thing she was terrified of. I approached with my leather satchel, counting out the bills. They felt too new, too crisp for a place this forgotten. $100, I said, my voice flat, as we agreed. But my eyes weren't on her. They were fixed on that same center post. The wood was too dark, too perfect. "Strange how your husband built these supports," I murmured, just loud enough for her to hear over the river. "Most folks would use pine, something local. But this looks like it was meant to hide something." Her breath caught in her throat, a tiny, sharp sound of fear. Hide something! But I'd already turned away from her, already stepped onto the bridge, and that's when the world went quiet. The wooden planks beneath my heavy boots made no sound at all. None. In a place where every board should shriek and groan with age, this bridge was as silent as stone. I stopped. Dead center. The silence was heavy, unnatural. I could feel it on my skin. Clara knew it too. I saw it in her eyes. She'd walked this bridge before, and her own footsteps had never echoed here. Not once. She handed me the deed, her fingers shaking so badly the paper almost slipped. "The man who owned it before us," she whispered, her voice cracking. "He always said this bridge would make someone rich. I thought he was just an old man rambling." I folded the deed carefully, my gaze still scanning the bridge. My attention was elsewhere. Carved into that center post, so faint you'd miss them unless you were looking, were symbols. Shapes and lines that didn't belong on any ordinary bridge in this territory. And beneath my feet, one particular plank felt different. Not loose, not warped. It felt warm, as if something deep underneath was generating a low, steady heat. I looked up at her, my eyes locking with hers. "Mrs. Hardin," I said, my voice low and quiet, "why did you really need to sell this so fast?" She looked away, toward the dark woods on the far side of the river. "My husband, he died owing money to dangerous people." Her voice was a strained whisper. "I had to make a choice, sell the bridge or lose everything else I have." But she was lying, or at least, she wasn't telling me the whole truth. She hadn't told me about the letter her husband left behind, the one that spoke of a secret that sleeps beneath the crossing. And she damn sure hadn't mentioned why, for the past week, she'd heard sounds coming from under this bridge in the dead of night. The scrape of metal on stone. The groan of something heavy being moved. As I shook her hand to seal our deal, neither of us saw it. In the weak morning light, the strange symbols carved into the center post had started to glow. 3 hours later, I came back. Alone. The sun was higher now, cutting long, sharp shadows through the wooden railings. But it wasn't the light that caught my attention. It was the sound my boots made on the planks. Each step echoed, a deep, hollow boom that vibrated through the soles of my feet. It was completely different from the dead silence of the morning. The bridge wasn't silent anymore. It had found its voice. I knelt down, pressing my ear flat against the wood. I could hear it. A faint, rhythmic clicking from somewhere deep inside the structure. Something was underneath me, and it was active. Clara had practically fled after taking my money, clutching that $100 like it was a shield that could protect her from hell itself. But her eyes, just before she left, had lingered on that center post. I couldn't shake the look of pure terror I'd seen there. She didn't just know something. She was a part of it. The question was what and why $100 was enough to make her run from it. I pulled a small, sharp knife from my belt and started scraping at one of the symbols on the post. It wasn't old carving. The wood shavings that fell away were fresh, pale against the dark, aged timber. Underneath my blade, deeper cuts were revealed. Someone had been working on these markings, and they'd been here very, very recently. The carvings weren't random. They formed a pattern, a series of arrows and lines that all pointed down toward the stone foundation of the bridge, where it met the churning river. A sound from the road made me straighten up fast. Hoofbeats, coming hard. A single horse, ridden with a desperate urgency. I stood, my hand resting on the hilt of my knife, as Clara Hardin burst from the tree line. Her face was flushed, her hair wild from the hard ride. She threw herself from the saddle before the horse had even stopped, her long skirt catching on the horn. "I forgot something," she gasped, her chest heaving. She was out of breath, but her eyes were sharp, focused. She wasn't just here for something she forgot. She was here to see what I had found. I watched her, my expression unreadable. "What did you forget, Clara?" She didn't answer. She walked straight to the center post, to the very spot I had been examining. She ran her fingers along a section of wood that looked identical to the rest, her touch sure and certain. And then she pressed. The wood moved inward with a soft, mechanical click. A small, hidden compartment swung open, no bigger than a brick. Inside, nestled on a bed of dark velvet, was a single folded piece of paper. "My husband's final letter," she whispered, her voice filled with a sorrow so deep it seemed to shake her whole body. "I was supposed to destroy it, but I couldn't." She unfolded the paper with trembling hands. I stepped closer, my suspicion warring with a sudden strange urge to protect this woman. "What does it say?" Clara's voice broke as she read the words aloud, her whisper carrying on the river breeze. "Clara, if you are reading this, then Jeremiah Ward has finally come for what I owe him. The bridge holds more than just our memories. Look beneath the third plank from the center, where the river runs deepest. What's there will save you, but only if you can trust the right person." The blood drained from her face, leaving her skin as pale as ash. "Jeremiah Ward," she breathed, the name tasting like poison. "He's the banker in town. He's been demanding payment on debts I never knew existed." I studied her face, trying to see past the fear to the truth. "How much do you owe him?" Her eyes were hollow. $800. Money I'll never have." She folded the letter with a sharp, final gesture. "My husband died in an accident at the mill 3 months ago. At least, that's what everyone says." The way she said, "everyone says," sent a chill down my spine. This wasn't just about debt. "You think it wasn't an accident, don't you?" Clara looked down at the silent, waiting planks beneath our feet. Her voice dropped so low I could barely hear it. "I think my husband found something. Something valuable enough to kill for." She looked up at me, her eyes burning with a desperate fire. "And I think Jeremiah Ward knows exactly what it is." But as we stood there, locked in a moment of terrible understanding, neither of us saw him. Neither of us noticed the figure watching from the dense tree line across the river. A man who had been listening to every single word. And as he shifted his weight, we didn't see the glint of the sun off the polished steel of a rifle barrel. The figure in the trees moved, just a flicker of motion, but I saw it. I saw the flash of sunlight on metal. My blood ran cold. "Clara," I said, my voice a low growl. "We need to leave. Now." But she wasn't listening. She was already on her knees beside the third plank from the center, her hands flying along its edges, searching for a seam, a weakness. "Help me lift this," she whispered, her voice urgent, frantic. I glanced toward the tree line again. The watcher was gone. He had vanished back into the shadows. That didn't make me feel better. It made me feel worse. It meant he was repositioning. It meant he was getting ready. I grabbed the edge of the plank. The wood was heavy, solid oak. Together we strained, putting our backs into it, and with a deep groan, the plank came up. Underneath, in the hollow space between the support beams, was a small package wrapped in oiled leather. And beneath that, something else. A second, smaller box made of dark, polished wood. Clara's hands shook as she reached for it. She fumbled with the latch, her breath coming in ragged gasps. She threw the lid open. Inside, nestled in faded red cloth, lay dozens and dozens of gold coins. But these weren't American eagles or Spanish doubloons. I had never seen anything like them. Each coin was thick, heavy, and bore strange, angular markings that seemed to shift in the light. They felt ancient, cursed. "How?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "How did your husband get these?" "I don't know," Clara breathed, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and terror. "He worked at the mill. He saved every penny he ever earned. But this—" She picked up one of the coins, its weight surprising her. "This is enough. It's enough to pay Ward. It's enough to start over somewhere new." That's when we heard it. The thunder of approaching horses. Not one. Several. They were coming fast from the eastern road, the same direction she had come from. We both froze, the gold coin gleaming in Clara's hand. 3 riders burst from the woods, and I recognized the man in the lead instantly. Jeremiah Ward. His expensive black coat and polished boots marked him as the wealthiest, most powerful man in the territory. His face was a mask of cold, predatory confidence. "Close the box," I hissed, my voice sharp. "Put the plank back. Now." We worked frantically, our hands clumsy with haste. We slammed the heavy plank back into place, just as Ward and his men reined in their horses at the edge of the bridge. But it was too late. Ward's sharp, intelligent eyes missed nothing. He swung down from his horse with an easy grace and approached us, his boots making no sound on the silent wood. He walked with the confidence of a man who owned everything he saw. "Mrs. Hardin," Ward called out, his voice smooth as silk, but with an edge of steel. "I heard you sold my bridge this morning." Clara stood up slowly, trying to hide the small wooden box behind the folds of her skirt. "Your bridge?" she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I inherited this from my husband." Ward smiled. It was a terrible sight. A smile that never, ever reached his cold, dead eyes. "Your late husband was a man of many secrets, it seems. He used this very bridge as collateral for his final loan. Didn't he tell you?" He pulled a folded document from the inside of his coat. "Legal ownership," he said, tapping the paper. "Transferred to me upon his death, pending the full repayment of his debts." I stepped forward, putting myself between him and Clara. "I have a bill of sale," I said, my hand inching toward the knife at my belt. "Signed this morning." "Signed," Ward replied, his smile widening, "by someone who had no legal right to sell." His 2 companions shifted in their saddles, their hands moving to rest on the butts of the pistols holstered at their sides. "I'm afraid your $100 bought you nothing, Mr. Sinclair. Absolutely nothing." Clara's grip tightened on the hidden box. I could feel the tension radiating from her. If Ward found out what was in it, he would take everything. But if she tried to make a run for it, his men would cut her down before she took 2 steps. Ward continued, his gaze dropping to the floorboards at our feet, his eyes fixed on the 3rd plank, the one we had just replaced, the one whose edges were still scraped and splintered from our haste. "However," he said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, "I am a reasonable man. I'm willing to discuss a reasonable settlement." He took another step closer, his cold eyes gleaming with greed. Perhaps we should start by examining what has made this worthless old bridge so very, very valuable. And in that moment, with his eyes locked on that single plank of wood, Clara knew. He hadn't just shown up by chance. He hadn't been tipped off. He had been the one watching from the trees all along. He had let them do the work for him. There was no choice, no way to fight. Ward's men had their guns drawn before I could even think of reaching for my knife. He directed us off the bridge, down a narrow, winding path that plunged into the dense forest. He was leading us away from the main roads, away from any chance of being seen. We walked for what felt like hours. The sun beat down, and the air grew thick and heavy. Clara's dress, still damp from her panicked ride, clung to her, making every step a struggle. But she never complained. She walked with her head held high, her jaw set with a stubborn defiance that I found myself admiring more and more. I kept stealing glances at her, at the raw strength in her determined face. She had lost her husband, was about to lose her home, and was being marched into the wilderness by the man responsible. And still, she did not break. As dusk began to settle, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, we reached a clearing. Tucked back into a grove of ancient pine trees was an abandoned cabin. The structure was old, the logs gray and weathered, but it looked solid. It had a stone fireplace and heavy wooden shutters that could be bolted from the inside. It was a fortress, a prison. "We can rest here for the night," Ward said, though it was clearly an order, not a suggestion. One of his men kicked the door open. It swung inward with a long, mournful creak. Inside, a thick layer of dust covered everything, but the cabin was dry. And more importantly, it was defensible. There was only one way in and one way out. Ward's men shoved us inside. While Clara tried to wring the river water from her heavy skirts, I was put to work gathering firewood. The simple domestic act felt bizarre, almost insane after the terror of the past few hours. As I knelt on the dusty floorboards, arranging the kindling in the stone hearth, Clara came and stood beside me. "Asa," she said, her voice a low whisper so Ward's men, standing guard by the door, couldn't hear. "Why did you really buy the bridge this morning? The truth." I paused, the flint and steel in my hand. I looked up at her, into her tired but fiercely intelligent eyes. I decided she deserved the truth. "I've been watching Ward's business dealings for months," I admitted quietly. "Too many good people, honest people, losing their land, their homes, losing everything to him. Always under suspicious circumstances." Clara moved closer, her shoulder almost touching mine as she knelt by the growing fire. "So you were investigating him?" I fed a larger piece of wood into the flames. They leaped up, casting dancing shadows across her face. "My brother," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. "He lost his ranch to Ward last year. Died of a broken heart 2 months later. Ward called in a debt that should never have existed. A debt my brother had already paid." A silent understanding passed between us in the flickering firelight. We weren't just strangers thrown together by chance. We were both victims of the same predator. "The gold coins," Clara said, changing the subject, her voice still a whisper. "Have you ever seen anything like them before?" I pulled one of the 3 coins we'd managed to salvage from the chaos on the bridge from my pocket. In our frantic effort to hide the box, 3 coins had spilled out onto the planks. I had scooped them up before Ward's men grabbed me. I examined it again. The strange angular markings seemed to mock me. "They're not from any mint I recognize," I said. "But they're gold. Real, heavy gold." I weighed the single coin in my palm. It was worth a small fortune. A box full of them was unimaginable. "Your husband must have found them somewhere very special." Clara sat beside me, so close now I could smell the faint scent of the river still drying in her hair. "He used to disappear," she said, her eyes lost in the flames. for hours at a time. He told me he was checking his trap lines, but he never brought back any pelts. A thought sparked in my mind. Maybe he wasn't trapping, Clara. Maybe he was protecting you, keeping you away from something dangerous. Our eyes met. The space between us suddenly felt charged, electric. In the midst of all this danger and uncertainty, something new was taking root. Clara reached out, her fingers gently touching the back of my hand where it rested on the warm hearthstone. "Thank you," she whispered. "For today. For everything. You risked your life for a stranger." I turned my hand over, palm up, and my fingers curled around hers. "Maybe," I said, my voice rough with emotion. "I just want to know you better." The moment stretched, silent and fragile, full of unspoken promises and the hope of a future that seemed impossible just hours before. And then it was shattered. The sudden, sharp sound of approaching horses from the darkness outside. Ward had found them, or more accurately, his men had returned. The horses stopped just outside the cabin. I pressed a finger to my lips, my other hand still holding Clara's. I gently guided her toward the back wall, away from the windows and the door. Through the thin gaps in the wooden shutters, we could see the flickering dance of torchlight in the oppressive darkness of the forest. "I know you're in there," a voice called out. It wasn't Ward. It was someone else. Someone with an official, authoritative tone. "There's nowhere else to run, Mrs. Harden. Make this easy on yourselves." I frantically examined the cabin's rear wall. The logs were old, ancient. One near the bottom had rotted through, creating a small gap that led to the outside. If we could just widen it quietly, we might be able to slip out into the forest behind the cabin, using the darkness as our cover. Clara pressed close to me as I worked at the loose, crumbling wood with my knife. Her breath was warm against my neck. Despite the imminent danger, the feel of her so close sent my heart racing. "Mr. Sinclair?" the voice called out again. Ward must have sent for the local sheriff, a man everyone knew was in his pocket. He was making this look legal. "You've involved yourself in affairs that do not concern you. Walk away now, and no harm will come to you." The rotted log finally gave way with a soft, splintering crack. I carefully widened the opening, my hands working as silently as possible, trying not to make a sound that would give us away. Clara squeezed through first, her skirt snagging on the rough, splintered wood. I followed, pulling myself through the narrow gap and emerging into the cool, dark night air behind the cabin. We were free, but our freedom lasted less than a second. Ward had anticipated this. He had known we would try to run. Two of his men were waiting in the trees behind the cabin, their rifles drawn and aimed directly at our hearts. "Foolish," one of them said, stepping out of the shadows. His voice was flat, bored. "Very foolish. Turn around. Walk back inside." We had no choice. We had walked right into a trap within a trap. Inside the cabin, Ward sat comfortably in the room's single wooden chair, his expensive coat unbuttoned, a glass of whiskey in his hand. The fire I had built cast long, menacing shadows across his sharp, angular face. He looked like a king on his throne. "Sit," he commanded, gesturing with his glass toward the dusty floor near the fireplace. We remained standing. Clara's chin was lifted in defiance. "What do you want, Ward?" she asked, her voice clear and strong. Ward smiled that cold, dead smile again. "I want what your husband stole from me," he said, leaning forward in his chair, his eyes gleaming with a feverish greed. "Those coins. They came from my private collection. Your husband, your honest, hard-working husband, discovered where I kept them and helped himself to quite a sum." "That's impossible," Clara shot back, her voice ringing with conviction. "My husband was an honest man." "Your husband," Ward's voice turned as cold as a winter grave. was a desperate man. He owed me more than he could ever hope to repay. So he broke into my home, into my vault, and he took what he needed. He stood up and walked slowly toward Clara, circling her like a wolf circling its prey. And when I found out, he whispered, his face just inches from hers, I simply took back what belonged to me. I stepped between them, my body shielding her from his poisonous presence. By murdering him, I snarled. Ward's eyes flashed with a sudden violent anger, but his voice remained chillingly controlled. Thomas Hardin died in a tragic accident at the mill. Everyone knows that. Everyone, Clara whispered from behind me, her voice trembling with rage, knows what you paid them to say. For the first time, Ward's perfect composure cracked. A flicker of raw fury crossed his face. Your husband made his choice when he stole from me, he spat. I simply ensured there would be consequences. The admission hung in the smoky air. A confession. He had just confessed to murder. And his men, the sheriff, they had all heard every single word. But their faces showed nothing. Not shock, not surprise. Just a bored, easy acceptance. Now, Ward said, his composure returning as he walked back to his chair. You are going to tell me where the rest of my coins are hidden. Clara lifted her chin, her eyes blazing. I don't know where they are. Ward didn't even blink. He simply nodded to one of his men. The man grabbed my arms, twisting them viciously behind my back. A bolt of white-hot pain shot through my shoulder, and I grunted, biting back a cry. Perhaps this will help your memory, Ward said calmly, taking a sip of his whiskey. Clara watched in horror as the man twisted my arm further, the pressure becoming unbearable. I could see the pain reflected in her eyes, but I also saw something else. A flicker of an idea. I tried to send her a silent message with my own eyes. Stay strong. Don't give in. Stop! Clara cried out, her voice breaking. Please stop, I'll tell you. I'll tell you what you want to know. Ward raised a single finger. His man released the pressure on my arm, though he still held me in a painful grip. I'm listening, Ward said, a triumphant smirk playing on his lips. Clara took a deep, shuddering breath. My husband didn't steal your coins, she said, her voice growing steadier, more confident with each word. He found them. Ward's eyes narrowed. Found them where? In the old Spanish mine, she said, the words flowing smoothly now. Up in Devil's Canyon. Her voice was a masterpiece of deception. She sounded so sure, so certain. He stumbled upon it 3 months before he died. The coins were just scattered throughout the tunnels, left behind by miners from centuries ago. Ward stared at her, his expression a mixture of suspicion and raw greed. There is no Spanish mine in Devil's Canyon, he said flatly. There is, Clara insisted, her eyes flashing, if you know where to look. She glanced at me, and I gave her the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. She was brilliant. Thomas. He mapped the entire tunnel system. He was planning to file a legal claim on the land, but he died before he had the chance. Where is this map? Ward demanded, his voice hungry. Clara hesitated, just for a second, making her lie even more believable. It's hidden in our house, in a place only I would know where to look. Ward studied her face for a long, silent moment, searching for any sign of deception. Finally, a slow, greedy smile spread across his face. Then we'll all pay your house a little visit tomorrow morning, he said. But if you're lying to me, Mrs. Hardin, Mr. Sinclair will be the one to pay the price. He stood and walked to the cabin door. Tie them up, he instructed his men. We'll camp outside tonight. We leave for town at first light. As the men bound our hands tightly with rough rope, Clara caught my eye again. There was no Spanish mine. There was no map. She had just invented the entire story out of thin air to buy us time, and I understood her plan perfectly. "There's something else," Clara said, her voice stopping Ward just as he reached the door. He turned back, his curiosity piqued. "What?" "The coins you found on the bridge. That wasn't all of them. Not even close. Thomas showed me where he hid the really valuable ones, the ones he was saving for us." Ward's greed completely overrode his caution. He took a step back into the room. "Where?" Clara looked directly at me, her eyes sending me a clear, unmistakable message. "He hid them in the place where we first kissed," she said, her voice filled with a fake, wistful nostalgia. "The place where he proposed to me." She paused, letting the words hang in the air, loaded with meaning. "At the old church ruins, just east of town." My expression remained blank, but inside, I understood. The church ruins were real, but they'd never been there together. It was a place I had told her about earlier, a place from my own past. More importantly, the ruins sat high on a cliff overlooking Ward's own sprawling property. If we could somehow get there, we would have the advantage. We would have the high ground. Ward considered this new piece of information, his mind racing. "If you're leading me into another trap—" "I'm not," Clara said, her voice firm, cutting him off. "I just want this to be over. I want my life back. I want to bury my husband in peace and start over, somewhere far away from here." Ward nodded slowly, the greed in his eyes winning the battle against his suspicion. "Very well. We'll check your house for the map first. Then, we'll visit these church ruins." He stepped outside into the darkness, leaving us tied up with a single, sleepy-looking guard. As the night deepened around the small, isolated cabin, and the fire burned down to glowing embers, Clara began to work at the ropes binding her wrists. Beside her, tied back to back, I did the same. We had until dawn to escape, and we both prayed it would be enough time. The guard finally dozed off sometime after midnight, his head slumping forward, his rifle resting loosely across his knees. The fire had died down to a soft orange glow. Clara had worked her wrists raw against the coarse fibers of the rope, but at last she felt the knot loosen. With a final, painful twist, her hand was free. She moved with the silence of a cat, her fingers finding the knots on my ropes in the near darkness. In moments, I was free too. "Can you ride?" she whispered, her breath warm against my ear. I nodded, carefully flexing my injured arm. The pain was a dull, throbbing ache, but I could manage. Together, we crept like shadows toward the cabin's front window. Peeking through a crack in the shutter, we saw Ward and his other men wrapped in blankets, asleep around the dying embers of their campfire. Their horses were tied to a nearby tree, their shapes dark silhouettes against the starry sky. We slipped out the door, the hinges groaning softly in protest. We froze, listening, but no one stirred. We moved from tree to tree, our feet making no sound on the thick carpet of pine needles, until we reached the horses. They nickered softly as we approached, their warm breath misting in the cool night air, but they didn't raise an alarm. We chose the two strongest-looking mounts, carefully untying their reins. We led them quietly, step by painful step, deeper into the forest, far enough away that the sound of our escape wouldn't wake the sleeping men. Then we mounted and rode. We rode hard, pushing the horses, flying through the dark woods with only the moon to guide us. We rode east, toward the dawn, toward the church ruins. The first pale light of dawn was breaking as we reached them. The old stone walls rose like the broken teeth of a giant skull against the lightening sky. The ruins sat on the edge of a high bluff, offering a perfect, commanding view of the valley below. And nestled in that valley, surrounded by acres of stolen land, was Jeremiah Ward's large, opulent house. We dismounted, our horses breathing hard, their sides slick with sweat. "There's something I need to tell you," Clara said, her voice steady and calm now. The fear was gone, replaced by a cold, hard resolve. The Spanish mine, the map, it was all a lie. I allowed myself a grim smile. I figured that out back at the cabin, Clara. So what's the real plan? She didn't answer with words. She simply pointed, down the steep hillside, toward Ward's house. "My husband wasn't a thief," she said, her voice ringing with a fierce pride. "But he was smart. He was a very smart man. When Ward started demanding these impossible payments, when he started threatening us, Thomas knew he had to fight back." Her eyes blazed with a righteous anger that seemed to make her glow in the early morning light. "He broke into that house down there, and he didn't steal a thing. He took back only what Ward had already stolen from other people. Your brother's ranch money, the savings of a dozen other families, every family Ward has destroyed, every farm he's foreclosed on with lies and forged documents. Thomas documented it all." I stared at her, a slow, dawning realization spreading through me. This was never about a lost treasure. It was about justice. "The evidence," she said, her smile fierce and triumphant, "is hidden where Ward would never ever think to look." "Where?" I breathed. "Inside the bridge itself," she said. "Not under it. Inside. In the hollowed-out center beam. Thomas was a master carpenter before he had to take that job at the mill. He knew how to build secret compartments that looked like solid, seamless wood." I stared at her in stunned amazement. The silent bridge. The strange, dense wood of the center post. It all made sense now. "The documents proving every single one of Ward's crimes are in that bridge," she continued, "along with most of the coins Thomas recovered. The coins were the proof, each one stolen from a different family. Ward only got a handful of what's really there." The sound of approaching horses from the trail below cut her off. Ward and his men. They had found our tracks. They were riding hard, coming straight for the ruins. "He's going to be angry when he finds out we escaped," I said, checking the pistol I'd taken from the sleeping guard's holster before we left. Clara bent down and picked up a heavy, jagged piece of stone, testing its weight in her hand. A cold, dangerous smile touched her lips. "Good," she said. "Angry people make mistakes." As Ward and his party reached the bottom of the steep hill below the ruins, Clara stepped out into the open, onto the edge of the cliff. She called down to them, her voice carrying clearly across the still morning air. "Mr. Ward, I lied about the treasure being here, but I'm ready to show you where it really is." Ward's furious shout echoed off the ancient stone walls. "You'll pay for this deception, you little fool!" He spurred his horse, starting the charge up the treacherous slope. But Clara was already moving, already putting the next part of her brilliant, desperate plan into motion. A plan that would not just save them, but would expose Ward's empire of lies to the entire territory. Clara's voice rang out across the valley, a clear bell of defiance. "The real treasure is in the bridge, Ward," she shouted down at the charging men. "But so is the evidence of every family you've ever destroyed." The words hit Ward like a physical blow. For a split second he faltered, his face a mask of confusion and shock. But his rage quickly overtook his caution. This woman had made a fool of him, had led him on a wild goose chase while his prize was sitting right where he'd left it. "Kill them both!" he screamed to his men, his voice raw with fury. "Leave no one alive!" But Clara had counted on his anger. She had known it would make him reckless. As Ward and his men charged up the steep, rocky slope, we used the crumbling stone walls of the ruins for cover. They were exposed, an easy target. I fired the pistol, not aiming for the men, but for the rocks just above them. A shower of stone and debris rained down, spooking the horses. One of the men was thrown, his cry of pain cut short as he hit the ground. The others were forced to dismount and continue on foot, scrambling up the treacherous incline. It slowed them down. It bought us time. The first of Ward's men clawed his way to the top, his face slick with sweat, a pistol in his hand. I met him as he came over the edge of the wall, and my fist connected with his jaw. He crumpled to the ground, unconscious. The second man saw his companion fall. He hesitated, just for a moment, and that hesitation cost him dearly. Clara, moving with a speed and ferocity I'd never seen, brought the heavy stone she was holding down hard on his wrist. There was a sickening crack of bone. He screamed and dropped his weapon, clutching his shattered hand. Then Ward himself appeared, pulling himself over the last ledge, his fine coat torn and dusty, his face twisted into a mask of pure, murderous intent. He raised his pistol, its barrel aimed straight at Clara's heart. "Where are my coins?" he hissed, his chest heaving. "Your coins?" Clara laughed, a bitter, broken sound. "You mean the money you stole from widows and orphans? The payments you collected on loans that never existed?" "Prove it," Ward snarled, taking a step closer. Clara reached into the bodice of her dress and pulled out a small, tightly rolled piece of paper. One of the documents from the bridge. "I already have," she said, her voice ringing with triumph. "While you were sleeping so soundly last night, Asa and I weren't just planning our escape. We paid a little visit to the bridge." Ward's face went bone white. The color drained from his skin, leaving it a sickly, grayish pale. That's impossible." I stepped forward, holding up the leather satchel I'd been carrying. "Thomas was a thorough man, Ward. Bank records, forged documents, signed receipts for bribes paid to the sheriff, to land office officials. Everything you've done for the last 10 years. It's all documented. It's all in here." "And this morning," Clara continued, her voice like ice, "while you were chasing us through the woods, copies of these documents were delivered. To the territorial judge, to the federal marshal, and to the newspaper editor in the county seat." Ward's pistol wavered in his shaking hand. His world was collapsing around him. His crimes were exposed. His victims would finally have their justice. His carefully constructed empire was crumbling to dust before his very eyes. "The coins are evidence now," I said calmly, my voice steady. "And the territorial judge has already issued a ruling. All stolen property is to be returned to its rightful owners, starting with my brother's ranch." Ward let out a strangled cry of rage and despair. He raised his pistol again, his wild eyes locking on Clara. "If I can't have my money," he screamed, his voice cracking, "then nobody can." A single shot rang out, echoing across the valley. But it wasn't Ward who fired. From the trail below, the federal marshal, alerted by the documents we had delivered, had arrived with a full posse. The marshal's bullet struck the gun from Ward's hand. He cried out, clutching his bloody fingers, and fell to his knees. The posse swarmed the ruins, their weapons drawn. The fight was over. As the marshal placed Jeremiah Ward in iron shackles, he looked at him with cold contempt. "Jeremiah Ward," he said, his voice booming with authority, "you're under arrest for fraud, for theft, and for the murder of Thomas Hardin." 3 months later, Clara and I stood on a bridge. Not the old, silent one. A new one. Strong and solid, built with fresh timber that smelled of pine and promise. We stood in the exact same spot where we had first met, watching the sunset paint the river in shimmering streaks of gold and orange. The territorial court had moved swiftly. Ward was sentenced to hang. His stolen properties were returned to their rightful owners, and a substantial reward for exposing his vast criminal enterprise was granted to us. We had used it to buy the land, to rebuild the bridge, and to start a new life. Together. "Do you ever regret it?" Clara asked, her hand intertwined with mine. "Buying this bridge?" I turned to her, the evening light catching in her hair. I pulled her closer until her head rested on my shoulder, and I kissed her forehead. "Best $100 I ever spent," I said softly. It bought me more than a bridge. It bought me a treasure I never knew I was looking for. It brought me you." Clara smiled, a genuine, happy smile that lit up her entire face. She leaned into my embrace, and we stood there for a long time, listening to the gentle sounds of the river flowing beneath our feet. We had learned that sometimes the greatest treasures aren't gold coins hidden in secret compartments. Sometimes they're found in the quiet courage it takes to do what's right, and in the love that can grow from the ashes of shared trials. The bridge beneath our feet felt solid and true, built to last for generations, just like our love. If you enjoyed this incredible tale of love, courage, and hidden treasure, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more captivating stories. Your support helps us bring these adventures to you every single week. And if you'd like to support our storytelling, consider using the Super Chat. Every contribution helps us create even better content. Click on the video appearing on your screen now to discover another amazing story that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Thank you for joining us.